Okay, welcome everyone to the first Bridges of Belonging. I'm so excited to launch this initiative and to be able to share this first day with Matt and Zoe and all of you that have joined us on the call. I'm going to actually kick off with a territory acknowledgement. Over the last number of years, I've had the great opportunity to live on Coast Salish territory here in Victoria on the traditional territories of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. And over the last 2 months in particular, being really here all the time, I've really appreciated how beautiful this territory is and what great care and love those nations have taken of it over generations. So really grateful, and I know many of you are in different territories across this country and even in the States, and so hopefully you can take an opportunity to just acknowledge where you are and the beauty and grace that we're allowed to be here and to live, work, and play. In terms of protocol for today, we are recording the session, so by being on, you are acknowledging that and accepting that we're going to share this recording afterwards. And I just wanted to kind of kick off with a bit of an introduction about why this. So over the last few years, I've been doing a lot of diversity and inclusion work. And every time that I do that work and get to know people in different spaces and places, it just kept coming back to recognizing that everyone's their own person and everyone seeks to connect in different ways, and that looks and feels differently for everyone. And so these bridges of belonging are an opportunity to talk about what that means, what those journeys are for different people, and how we can really appreciate those journeys and respect that everyone has their own path, and we need to create spaces and places where everyone can thrive. So that's really the origins of this work and the origins of the work I want to do going forward. And so I'm just really grateful that folks have joined us today to start these conversations. So I'm going to kick off with a poem, and then I'm going to introduce our two speakers. So this poem is from Richard Wagamis from his book Embers, and he's an Ojibwe writer and has written some really amazing books, including Indian Horse, which is about residential schools. And if you haven't read it or watched the movie, it's a phenomenal but very thought-provoking piece of work. And so his Embers I've been reading throughout our COVID experience, and so many of them just really sit with me. So this one is about belonging. We approach our lives on different trajectories, each of us spinning in our own separate shining orbits. What gives this life its resonance is when those trajectories cross and we become engaged with each other, for as long or as fleeting as we do. There's a shared energy then, and it can feel as though the whole universe is in the process of coming together. I live for those times. No one is truly ever just passing through. Every encounter has within it the power of enchantment if we're willing to look for it. So with that, I'm going to introduce our two speakers. And so today we have with us Zoe Robinson. And Zoe is a trans woman who was a former CEO of a national sport organization. And that's when I first met her several years ago, and is now navigating the world as a woman after 54 years as living as a man. Zoe is a CPA and CMA and is on the board of the Canadian Mental Health Association and owner of Whitebox GSI Consulting. Zoe is an executive with over 20 years of leadership within the not-for-profit and sports sectors, and she excels in designing, building, and executing visionary strategies. And Zoe and I started these conversations in January in Ottawa, and so it's just a real pleasure to get to continue this work with you, Zoe, and I'm so pleased that you're here with us today.
My pleasure, Andrea. Thank you so much.
And Matt Fisher is a mental performance consultant. After being in the world of elite sport for 12 years as a strength and conditioning coach, he's shifted his focus to the mental side of coaching and athletic development. He greatly believes in the positive effects that sport offers both physically and psychologically, but is aware of how the high performance culture can inadvertently do more harm than good. His goal is to use his knowledge, experience, and education to instill change in Canada's athletic development culture to create more positive experiences for athletes from grassroots to professional development levels. And Matt and I had the pleasure of launching the first sport institute in Canada here in Victoria in 2008. We were some of the first staff on that, and really built some interesting cultures around that. So I look forward to hearing from you, Matt.
Thank you.
So with that, we're actually going to kick it off with Matt starting to just tell us a little bit about him and his journey, and then we'll go to Zoe and do the same. And I'm going to turn off the sharing screen, and I would encourage those of you that can toggle in your Zoom to pick the active speaker view so that you can fully take in the speaker's words. Over to you, Matt. Go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to express how thankful I am for this opportunity, Andrea, setting this up and getting to be on this panel with Zoe. I've really been looking forward to this. So, Matt Fisher, I go by the pronouns he and him. I currently reside in Vancouver with my amazing partner, Justine. We're expecting our first ever child in late July. So, yes, very, very exciting times for me. Yeah, as Andrea mentioned, I'm a high-performance consultant, so I've spent the last 10, 15 years doing strength and conditioning at varying levels with, from Olympic athletes down to the grassroots. And currently I'm at the tail end of completing my Master's of Counseling and in the midst of doing my internship providing mental health counseling right now, specifically more towards people dealing with the stresses of COVID, as we all are. So yeah, just really excited to be here and to have some amazing discussions.
Super. Zoe?
So I'm Zoe Robinson. I go by she, her, hers. So thank you, Andrea. It's a real honor to be able to join your first Bridges of Belonging podcast. I think that's awesome. So yeah, as Andrea mentioned, I lived most of my life as a man, and in November 2018, I decided to recognize my true and genuine, authentic self, which is a woman. And since that time, I've been navigating the world to try to become to transition, and I've socially transitioned completely. I socially transitioned while I was working with the Canadian Ski Patrol as their Chief Executive Officer and President. I had started hormone replacement therapy about 8 weeks ago. And I have to tell you that the whole experience of finding my true self has found a place of happiness and contentment and security for me. But it's not been without its troubles and barriers to come over with family and with work colleagues, and particularly, I think, as we'll talk a little bit further about my relationship with the sport community over the years and trying to reintegrate that, and just kind of like coming in and being a trans woman in society, fortunately, where we live in Canada, where it's more accepting, but there's still run across people who question my choice about that, and I'm sure we'll talk a little more about that.
Excellent. Thank you both for the great introductions. And I did fail to mention that my pronouns are she and her as well. So thanks for the reminder, Matt and Zoe. So in terms of what your experiences have been like, what really matters to you? What makes you feel like you're your authentic selves? So Matt, maybe we'll start with you and then go to Zoe.
Yeah, as a lifelong athlete, I feel like a lot of my identity, throughout my growth from, being a youth all the way into my career was really defined by sport, by considering myself an athlete, and so much of the positives that I've seen to help me become who I am have been, just so amazing. But just in the last few years, especially being immersed in the high performance world, I've just come to realize that for all the good out there, even for myself, there's a lot of things that I feel like just weren't the best experiences. And I feel very, very lucky that I think that I haven't been greatly negatively affected by that. But the more time I've spent in sport, I've really seen a lot of issues that I feel like are more on the human level than the athlete level, you know. So I always believe that before we're athletes, we're human beings. And so like I mentioned, having a soon-to-be child coming into the world, I really want to find ways to try and better this world for you know, my child and every other child out there. And you know, knowing that just based on my network and my experience, I feel that hopefully I can start to try and instill some systemic change within the sporting environment. So knowing that there's so many other bigger issues out there, the environment, the economy, everything else, I realize that, you know, one person can make a change, but, you know, I feel like my best opportunity to do that hopefully will be within the sport and exercise realm.
And Matt, within that comment, like one of the things that has resonated for me over the last year in particular is we have a number of conversations in the sports system around safe sport, is that person first approach, and how do we think about not commodifying our athletes, but actually meeting our athletes' needs and supporting their journey. So do you want to just elaborate maybe on your thoughts on that? And Zoe, I'm sure you have thoughts as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, you know, one of the things that really was a bit of an eye opener for me with one of my courses was on adolescent development. And, you know, I chose to focus on a specific project paper on sport. And so much of what you read about in the, you know, peer-reviewed research is on all the positive things within sport. And what I was coming to realize from my own experience as a coach was, often those positive experiences are coming from the athletes who are able to remain in sport. I feel like as you and I well know, even with opening up, you know, PICE in 2008, I feel like that high performance culture, which, you know, I believe there's a place for it. I believe there's a lot of positives. It seems to have sort of, you know, worked its way down to the grassroots. And when I think about what 10, 11, 12-year-old athletes are doing and are expected to do, and the pressures that are put on them these days that I never felt, you know, at 20, 30 years ago. I just really question, you know, the direction that we've gone and the direction that we continue to go. And so one of the things I feel like really sort of bothers me is the number of times I've been told, well, you know, and I'm sure Zoe can speak to this, if you want to reach that elite level, well, you have to have that mental toughness or that resiliency, or you need to be able to deal with these sorts of things. And so to me, I feel like, you know, not to steal a term from, you know, male toxicity, but the toxicity in sport and the extra expectations that can often be put on athletes of any age almost take away that human side. It's almost like I see where we're treating athletes as robots, or like you said, commodities, and we're forgetting that there's a human being underneath there. And so to me, the moment we forget that, we're in trouble.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I harken back to a time when my son, who's 21 now, was an umpire at kind of, I think, a Mosquito game or something like that. And you know, here's this 12-year-old kid wanting to go out. He plays baseball, loves baseball, was umpiring, getting his time to do that. You know, he's learning at the same time. And then it'd be amazing at the invective that would be thrown at him from coaches on the side and parents behind the screens about, oh, you missed that, you know, you're lousy at your job. And I'm thinking back going like, what are you doing? You know, if you want my son, this young man, young boy, in order to grow and prosper and be a contributing member to our society, this is not helping, you know, and he stuck it out for probably half a season and then quit because he just went, you know, Dad, my kids still call me Dad, and I encourage that. That why would I take that? Why would I be in that atmosphere? It's not comfortable. I don't feel wanted. It's stressful, and I think that, you know, your observation that the peer review research is, you know, generally positive, I think was really interesting, because how much are the researchers going and looking at those kids who leave sport? Why do they leave sport? You know, it's not a positive experience for anybody, for everybody, rather. for people from marginalized communities, whether that be marginalized geographical communities, or whether that be marginalized First Nations, whether that be LGBTQ, that there are lots of boys and girls, men and women, non-conforming individuals who don't have that experience with sport. They don't feel like they belong, and so they're put out of that. And I think you're right. It's not having a caring attitude towards the human. When we realize that less than 1% of the hockey players in this country will become NHL players, less than 2% probably ever go into the CHL or the WHL. These statistics are the real facts, and that ultimately sport should be there to help kids and recreational adults feel that they belong to a larger community, that they have the comradeship, they get the feeling of belonging with other friends, they create friendships, and they get all the positive things from that. And that's what we should be teaching our kids from the very beginning in sport. Not that you're going to be the next Wayne Gretzky, or you're not going to be the next Mikhail Kingsbury in skiing, or Eric Gay, or a crazy Canuck, or it's that at the end of the day, those are rarefied people. And it's great to have them as role models, and it's great to aspire for that. But I think, particularly the sports system in general, and coaches in particular, and parents especially, need to keep a realistic view on what that is, and particularly when it comes to the marginalized communities.
So Zoe, we sort of went on a bit of a sport tangent there, but let's circle back a little bit to, what really matters to you about this conversation and about belonging, and sort of what's for you around.
I spent a long time in my life being unhappy, dealing with mental illness, which I still deal with, and I'm very much open about that in terms of my general anxiety, and to the point where it become crippling, both in my relationship with my ex-spouse, with my children, with my friends, and my work. And what I didn't thought I belonged anywhere. To be honest with you, when I understood where my identity was, and how I was keeping that identity in a false box, in a frame that was not the right frame for me. When I realized that, it was releasing, and not without fear. Oh my God, tremendous fear in terms of what would happen. But over the past 18 months, I've come to learn that I have to love me first, sense that my identity is Zoe, my identity is a woman, my identity is that experience. And there's things I will never know, just will never know, because biologically, yes, I still, have those male chromosomes, and I don't have that full female experience. So belonging as a woman in a society where we tend to have strict gender roles, by and large, that are bifurcated, you're male and you're female, and people like me are in between. And sometimes I even kind of scratch my head and go, where do I sit in that spectrum? But over time, my sense of belonging has come through my self-confidence. My self-confidence has come from acceptance and being accepted by people. So one of the first experiences that I had in this regard was really at the Canadian Ski Patrol, when I came out while I was their president and CEO, and being accepted by that community at an AGM last June, and opened with welcome arms, and that people came to me afterwards. A board member has a child who's a trans male. I'd run into other people who were questioning their identities or their sexuality, and they just didn't feel that they could come out and say that in the atmosphere of the Ski Patrol. And by me coming out, they felt, oh, it's safer to say those things. And so that was really meant so much to me, that there's a community that understands and accepts me. When I talk about, I waited so long to go on hormone replacement therapy because, I really, are you just a man in a dress? You kind of, speaking in the back of your head, and the therapy has been amazing. I never would have thought what the mental changes would have been on it, but they've been incredibly positive. And it makes me feel more and more as a woman that I am day after day after day. And while I don't have my 54 years experience as a male, that may say, well, you're not a woman. I go, well, no, but it's still me. It still informs who I am. And I feel every day I go out now, and I don't get misgendered very often anymore. My voice clocks me, as it does a lot of trans women. But for the most part, I have felt accepted by certainly the society here in Vancouver, and as I've traveled the country, I've never had a problem with discrimination. I've never had a problem really with harassment. Only once I've been harassed. But I also know that at the end of the day, having gone to school, grown up as a cis male with privilege, who's professionally educated, who has a professional accreditation as a chartered professional accountant, my experience is different than a lot of other people. So there's another sense of layer of belonging about where, and I'm finding more people who have experiences like me, as opposed to someone who's in the 20s and 30s, who's trying to find their way through life as a trans male, trans female, as a gender non-conforming individual, that at the end of the day, belonging really, it really is circumstantial in terms of the way in terms of where you live in your society. So I'm lucky in many ways to feel that I do belong, but in fact, it's funny, you asked me where I don't feel I belong. Sometimes I don't feel I belong in the broader trans community because I maybe not as active and as a vocal, activist, political activist around the trans movement, although I very much support it. But I may have different kind of more, conservative type of views around the whole thing.
That's really great, Zoe. One of the things I've really appreciated in your experience is how open you've been about sharing it. And no, but it's
you have to be. You have to be.
Too, but like lots of people have questions, right? And so you've been, really upfront about like openness about answering the questions and encouraging people to ask questions and get to know you and what matters to you and how you want people to understand and appreciate who you are and what your journey is.
Yeah, I think it's, I will answer any questions. I'll even answer the questions that most trans people find just totally don't go there, so, body image, body parts, those type of things. I'm willing to answer those questions because people don't understand. While at the same time, I am not the encyclopedia for being a trans person. My experience is my experience, as I said before. You go talk to another trans person and who has a different life experience to me, their experience is totally different. And they may not want to answer those questions. They may have greater gender dysphoria than I have. I'm still very much, around my body image. I've always been conscious, but I'm still very conscious about my body image. But if I can't talk about it, then it's not real to me. And if I can't verbalize to people kind of my experience through kind of trying to tell some stories around that, then all I'm doing is staying in my shell and not trying to, for me, it's about integrating in society. It's about being accepted and belonging in the broader society. Well, supporting other people like me who are trans or gender non-conforming, that I know struggle in this world, that have different struggles than me. But as I said, it's I'll answer anything at the end of the day. Just don't ask me all the time. And as I said, I'm not the be all and end all for trans. I'm a baby trans person in many ways. 18 months, I cry a lot. But yeah, I just think that's important. Be who you are. Be confident who you are. Be brave and courageous to tell your story.
And I really appreciate as well the acknowledgement that your story is your story, and it comes back to that individuality and person-centered and how do we get to know each person and support them on their journey rather than the word we used earlier, sort of commodifying a group of people, because that doesn't serve any of us very well at the end of the day.
No, and I think, Matt, it's interesting, in your experience working in sport as a service provider and as an athlete, how have you dealt with kind of that range of humans that participate in sport? And how do you make them all belong when they have different needs and wants and experiences?
Great question, and I wish I had the perfect answer. I think that's just it. Is there's an assumption, especially I feel like as we get higher up the sort of high performance ladder, that everybody's there for the same reason, and so that you can just treat, especially when you're working with a team, versus individuals, and trying to meet all of those needs in a certain way. And I think a lot of that just comes down to what I'm realizing and have been taught when it comes to my counseling education is again that human connection. And so knowing that not every athlete that I worked with wants to go to the Olympics or wants to make the NHL. What are they there for? And trying to sort of figure out, well, what are they looking to get from sport? And if that might be community, if that might be connection, if that might be confidence building, finding out ways to try and tap into what they're looking for. And I think one of the difficulty comes is oftentimes athletes don't necessarily know why they're there. Is their motivation because of parents? Is it because they shown talent and now there's an expectation that it would be a waste not to pursue it? So I feel like the opportunity that I had, and I think one of the great things being, in a weight room environment is there's a level of trust that we know needs to be built there when, you're spotting somebody and their health is in your hands, and the conversations that can be facilitated with the relationships that are developed there, I think can be taken outside of the sport context and more about that human being. I know that I've made plenty of mistakes, and I'm sure there's a lot of athletes who probably felt like I never managed to connect with them. But I think I realized that oftentimes I was, I guess, going against the grain of what I was doing and what I was utilizing my coaching sessions for. The number of times I would have teams that would come, from skill-based training sessions just in tears because it was not a positive experience. So the last thing I wanted to do was do a conditioning session with them. So we'd lay down and do mindfulness. We'd have conversations, and I'm pretty sure that's stepping outside of my realm as a strength and conditioning coach. But there was opportunity there to engage on a human level.
Yeah, as a sport executive, I've seen, I've been responsible for managing an organization that has financial targets, that has performance targets, and that, finding that balance between, at the high performance level, between having the athletes help serve the organization and serve the purpose of the organization, helping meet their own personal needs. And sometimes and often those things conflict with one another. And it's hard. But I always believed that at the end of the day, you had to treat them thoughtfully. And I've probably failed many times trying to do that. I think where the sports system has really struggled is when athletes are forced to retire, or even when they choose to retire. And I've seen this time and again, I'm sure all of us have seen it, where they struggle for months, if not years, and they try to come back and that doesn't work. And, because the athlete world is so structured, and that they have people telling them what to do all the time, every day. Go do this, go here, do that technical drill, do that strength, eat this, go to that mental training session, get on a plan, go to that competition. And so it's very stressful. So when they lose that sense of belonging to a community. And I think as a sport community, we've done a very bad job in trying to keep those individuals connected to their former teammates and to their sport, because we've just moved on. And I don't know the answer to how do you do that with the resources that the community has, but it's always been something that I've been very sensitive about. And and conversely, the athlete's mental health, which I think, like the Olympic Committee's game plan, I think, was when it was announced 3-4 years ago. I thought it was an amazing initiative because it finally, the Olympic Committee of Canada, Canadian Olympic Committee, recognized that we have to treat our athletes as Canadians, as people first. And I thought that was such a positive view. And that type of change takes time.
Absolutely. Zoe, why don't you tell us about your journey in not belonging and times and spaces where you haven't felt like you've belonged? And I know from our conversations, you have some of those currently, but I'm sure probably in your past and getting to where you've gotten to in your life, you've had that.
Yeah, I think that particularly people who are married, who come out late in life, there is a real cord cutting that goes on. And certainly the friends that I had with my marriage, who are, and often through my spouse, the kids and the spouse, that's where men tend to get their friends, and families. It's, at least my experience has been that to a large degree. And when I came out and separated from my spouse, I lost all that. And I really wandered for a while. As I said, going and seeing old friends from high school and university, and it took them a long time to kind of get used to Zoe. And they're good now. And in fact, some of my old friends from the family life are coming back, and it just takes time. But you do tend to question yourself. Why am I doing this? Where do I belong? I'm comfortable with myself, but I walk out every day, and I'm lonely. And it's not just my experience, but it was because I made a conscious decision to accept who I am, and that railed against the norms of society in many parts. And so, I felt kind of fish out of water a lot of the times in that case. Within the sport community. So it's funny, when the first talk I did was at the Coaching Association's Canada Sport Leadership Conference in Richmond last fall. And I was terrified. Here's a community I'd spent 2 decades working with as my male self. And I had no idea how people were going to accept me. And what I've learned is that the stories you tend to tell in your head are far worse than the stories that they actually are. And I think it's a defense mechanism. So if it's really bad and I've said it's bad, then I'm okay. But if I think it's really bad, it's really good. Oh my God, it's elation. I had that elation, being able to meet people like Andrea and other people that I've known for years, the women particularly, and that I could finally have a relationship with the women as a woman meant so much to me. And it, that fear evaporated. But you create these head stories about where you just don't belong. But that was a great experience. I was welcomed, I was embraced. There's some people who avoided me. It's going to happen. I've learned that people don't like you. I've said before, people didn't like me before for some reason. Now they just don't like me because I'm a trans woman. So that's okay. And, I can deal with that. But I think one of the other times where I felt, I talk about the trans community, and I've gone to several group therapy sessions. And there was one session I went to a community here in Vancouver. I sat in the room. I went many times, and I really felt like this isn't me. That we're not talking the same thing. Your experiences are different. We dress differently. We live different lives. You're talking about stuff that I go, it doesn't relate to me. So where do I fit in this community? As I said before, I'm not the militant trans activist. I'm proud. I want to support people. I want to support, help people transition through their lives, find their true, authentic, genuine selves, transition well at work and with families. But people think that, the trans community is this monolithic group, just like people think women are monolithic groups, or Black Americans or Black Canadians are a monolithic group, or Asian, or whatever the case is. And I go, it's so far from the truth, is that at the end of the day, within each of these descriptors, because it's easy for us to put a term on a group of people, because that's okay, I understand that. You dig deeper, oh my God, there's a huge variety of context of experience within that, and there's infighting within the community, and it's amazing. And I see it online, and I've got some friends who are very active online, and it's, you know, whether it's trans exclusionary radical feminists, or it's, you know, it's some trans women who feel that, you know, it doesn't matter what you present like, as long as you feel like you're a trans woman. You know, the beauty standards of being a woman in the world today, you know, do you have to conform to that? No, you don't. Absolutely you don't. And that's a choice. But, you know, don't think that the community is wrapping its arms all around everybody all at the same time. And so I have found hard to find my place within that community as well. But all in all, given all those things, no, I'm just happy for being who I am. I'm happy that I get up every morning. I'm Zoe. I put makeup on and I get dressed and I walk out and I enjoy the world as me, and they see a much more radiant, happy individual. And that's because I accepted myself. And so the first part of belonging is belong to you, accept you first. And then if you can love you, you can love other people, and people can love you in return. But if you can't love you, doesn't matter, in my opinion, doesn't matter what you do or how you can't love you first. It's hard for people to express that back, and it's hard for you to express that to others at the same time.
Yeah, what a fantastic and strong message, Zoe. Thank you. Loving yourself and belonging to you first. So thank you. That's definitely a piece I will take away in terms of your teachings of me. Matt, what about you? What about a time you didn't belong, or you saw athletes or people you're working with that weren't belonging, and sort of how did that look and feel, and what did you do to kind of mitigate or shift the culture?
You know, I'm going to be the first to admit that I've lived a very privileged life. You know, and so when you sort of sent us a couple of questions to sort of ponder ahead of time, I was initially struggling with this question, which to me is, if there's any question to struggle with, it's to you know, it's a great thing to have to think about where I may not have belonged. And so what I ended up sort of realizing is one of the great things about my Master of Counseling program was the amount of self-reflection that we were forced to go through, you know, to try and identify those potential blind spots that we might have that could affect how we work with other people. And so what I really realized was, you know, growing up in Oak Bay in Victoria, amazing neighborhood, amazing community. My sister and I and my mom, we were outliers as my mom's Japanese. And so, you know, I think at the time going up through elementary school and high school, at the time I didn't realize until I really was able to reflect and sort of realize who I am as a human being, that there were times that I didn't feel comfortable, you know, in my own skin, I guess, to put it that way. And so this is where I would say the other side of the positive side of sport is what really helped me to actually feel that sense of belonging. You know, I could connect through sport in a different way. You know, if people were to ask me, do you feel like you've been, you know, discriminated against based on your race? No, I don't think I've got any specific, you know, examples to use, but I know for myself, there was always, again, something that I think felt a little bit different than, you know, I have amazing friends that I still have from kindergarten, and you know, they always accepted me. So I always felt supported, but I do know that there were times upon reflection that I just didn't feel like I was quite in the right place. And as weird as this sounds now, you know, living in Vancouver, where there is a, you know, a bigger Asian population, and even when I would go down to Los Angeles and spend time with my mom's side of the family, again, it was this intangible feeling that was different. Did I feel like at the time I could identify it as feeling like I was belonging more? No, not necessarily. But, you know, now with experience and reflecting back, yeah, I would say that as amazing a place as Victoria is, and I want to get back there one of these days, yeah, there were certainly times growing up in Oak Bay that just didn't feel like I was right in the right place.
Well, if you want to talk about belonging and getting to know yourself, be the child of a psychoanalyst.
I can only imagine, Zoe. I can only imagine.
Everything you do has a meaning, apparently.
And that's what I need to make sure not to instill on my future child is I'm going to be hopefully avoiding that hyper analysis of everything they do, every movement they take, every word.
Sometimes a cigar is, you know what, just a cigar.
Yeah.
I'm going to move into the next question, but I do want to encourage our audience, if you've got a question, you can put it in the chat box, which is just in the control panel of Zoom. And you can just write your question and we'll work to respond to some of those before the end of the session today. So the next question I want to talk about is psychological safety. And so, Matt, maybe since you were just up, we'll start with you and sort of how you create psychological safety, what your experience with it has been. I know recently when you and I had an opportunity to see each other in person pre-COVID, we were talking about psychological safety and gender and some of your experiences in witnessing some different life experiences to what your own had been. So do you want to maybe just comment around that and how that impacts belonging?
Yeah, you know, I would go to with all the different theories that I've been introduced to in this counseling education, you know, the one that really resonates with me has been Carl Rogers, you know, person-centered approach of just, you know, congruence, genuine authenticity, unconditional positive regard and acceptance, and accurate empathy. You know, I think empathy is one of those words that's thrown out all the time now, and you know, I think it can get interchanged with sympathy too often. And you know, I think one of the discussions that you and I had was talking about you know, how when sport can create inclusion, it can create that community, it can create that sense of camaraderie that you may not find at your school or your workplace or whatever else. It also forces you to go into that specific box of, you know, I'm male or I'm female. Am I registering for this competition? You know, and so what I've seen more and more, which I see a lot of athletes struggling with, is when they are, I guess, in that position where, for example, and Zoe will be able to speak to this much better than I ever could, but trying to make those decisions of, you know, if I might feel more authentic and more comfortable in this realm, what am I potentially losing from the other side that may lose a lot of those connections that I have? And that's one of those places that I've struggled to try and find ways to support athletes in those positions, because I don't have any answers. You know, not to say that there is a right or wrong answer there. But I think as well that what I'm also seeing in I guess more of the general grassroots sense is the expectation of competition, of you need to be good at something to participate. You know, it's all about getting better and making that next level. And to me, that's taking away of the fun of sport. You know, the number of times I ask athletes, are you having fun doing what you're doing? And they're not. And to me, I question, well, why are we doing this? Is this, you know, I assume that we all started and again, sport is just one example, whether it's music or art or whatever it might be. You know, I would like to think that we all begin from a place of enjoyment. And unfortunately, I feel like more and more I'm seeing how constraints of expectations are starting to take away the fun of just what should be an enjoyable activity, no matter whether it's sport or outside of it. And so trying to find ways to bring that fun back within the systems that we've created is another place that I feel like I'm struggling with, and something that I'd like to try and change, because yeah, I feel like we're niching people into places they may never be comfortable.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a 16-year-old daughter as well who's danced since she was 5 years old, and she's very good at what she does. And for a long time, she wanted, you know, she looked at would dancing be an avenue to post-secondary education. It wasn't really being considered as a profession in her mind. She wanted to be a scientist at one point. Now she wants to be a cop. She's this big too, so. But what's interesting is that this is, I think, where the parental influence becomes really important for young children. Is they help them put things in context. So if the parents are helping put things in context, particularly if the coach or the instructor is driving them towards that performance standard, I think we have to find ways to make sure that, you know, the kids really understand what they want to get out of it. So we've got to empathize. We have to ask them questions. We have, often it's hard work, as you know, Matt, about what comes out of people's mouths the first time is generally not what they mean at times. And so you've got to dig deeper and ask questions and try to see things from their point of view, ask why, and get down to, and that may take several conversations to do. And it's a lot to ask a coach to do or an instructor to do. But I think that they have to try to open up with those things and make that a safe place for people to understand why the child's there. So I think, at the club level in particularly, if you're going to coach, maybe you have to make the time and investment to sit down with the child, not in a one-on-one situation, but in a safe space where you can have a private conversation, yet still create that safe environment with another person or other people around to have the conversation, and have them, what they're like. And there's many athletes kids who don't want to do that. And you're fine. You come back. Those kids are going to open up and embrace that. But I think that coaches need to take that first step and to do it, because they are the front line around trying to make an enjoyable atmosphere, an enjoyable time for kids, and for adults who participate in adult leagues. I know I have two of my son's friends played in the WHL. They love the pickup game with the parents. That's the best time that they have. It's not going and playing in an arena full of 10,000 people, on the pressure of having to go. They just want to go and skate and have fun and have a pop or two and talk about things, and that's what they find enjoyable. My God, I wish we could make that the norm for people. But this is where I come back. Parents are so important with this, and so I think the sport community has a real responsibility to educate parents to do, to be more supportive and not to be as driven and have their, dare I say, have their dreams fulfilled through their children.
And just to sort of quickly tag on to that, Zoe, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, oftentimes I feel coaches are stuck between a rock and a hard place, because as much as, the club organization can put, the LTAD principles up there and, what should we actually be focusing on at this current stage, parents expect winning. You can be a 12-year-old playing soccer, and yeah, winning is not, losing isn't always fun, but when a coach, even if they're a volunteer coach, is in a place where the parents or the organization are upset with them because the team's lost every single game, well, just because the kids are having fun enough, that's not enough for those other people, and so that coach, basically puts their neck on the line if they do potentially what they think is right, not just, within themselves, but within what the research has started to show. So yeah, I don't envy the position that a lot of coaches are put in there.
And to layer on top of that, now we've got all of these other pieces around distancing measures and safe sport measures, and the pressure just continues to mount. I want to circle to the question that we had in the chat box from Mark. So thank you, Mark, from Bonobo. He was asking about, have we looked at integrating measuring and assessing belonging in the work that we do? It's challenging to measure a feeling, but we know how critical it is to the participant experience. So have you seen something that measures belonging, either of you? Have you thoughts about how do we start to make belonging tangible so that people know what to strive for?
Well, I think the mental health expert, mental consultant expert would be better placed to answer that question.
Oh, throwing it to you, Matt.
I know I put pressure on you, Matt. I'm sorry.
By no means do I profess to be an expert, and the moment I do, I've got to recheck myself. But no, that's an amazing question, and I think that where I'd say is no. Do I have an experience of that specifically, in the sport realm or in the mental health realm at the moment? No. I think that, I would love to say anecdotally with experience and trying different things out, you could try to get a slightly better understanding, but is that going to hold up in a peer-reviewed journal? Of course not. I think where a lot of change happens, I'd say one of the biggest issues that I see, not just in the mental performance realm, but as we know, is just the level of self-awareness. So oftentimes, and especially within a sporting context, are we truly getting honest answers, or are we getting the answers that that the athlete or the child thinks we want to hear, or is the right answer? And knowing that, yes, there's a lot of assessments, there's a lot of screens out there from the psychological world, the clinical psychological world, that are supposed to be set up to try and filter out some of those things. But I still question the validity of those based on the level of self-awareness and feeling like, for how much I've worked on my own level of self-awareness, and still knowing that there's so many of my behaviors, my decisions are driven by things that I'm probably not aware of. Can I even say that I really know when I'm truly feeling like I'm belonging or helping other people to feel like they're belonging? No. I would love to get to that place. And I hate to say, I think for a lot of people, they're not going to truly buy into it until they get a quantifiable metric that says, this isn't worth doing until we can actually measure whether it's working or not. But when that'll happen, or maybe there's something out there I'm unaware of, to me, that's a huge but important challenge.
Yeah, listen, I think that there's, I don't know of any study that's been done or any tool that's available that measures belonging specifically. We do know that, wellness tools are used quite often, both in the mental health field. They've been used lots within the athletic field as well to gauge, how an athlete's feeling in order to modify volume and intensity of the training environment in order to make sure that they're not being too stressed, or that if they're under stressed, they're putting in the right stress. And so I think that there's probably a lot of data out there that would point to feeling of belonging, but if we don't make it a priority to talk about that, then no one will want to measure it. So, between Inclusion Incorporated and Matt Fisher as an expert mental coach consultant, that, there's a great research project, because, and I say that in all honesty, because at the end of the day, I'm sure there's lots of variables that can be looked at in terms of level of trust, the level of perceived self-acceptance, or perceived acceptance by the group, the amount of, how they feel about the interactions with the other players, or acceptance from the coach, and feelings of worthless. So I think I gotta believe that if you look at the whole totality of the research, that there's lots, and if you can pinpoint what belonging really means, it'd be a great tool to have. To allow people to have. And that's a great question. It's an excellent question. Yeah.
Okay, Mark, you and I will have to have another conversation about that and figure that one out. Jesse's just posted a question. What are your thoughts on all kids being winners versus actual competition and only having one winner in youth sports? How do you allow for a sense of belonging while still allowing for growth and competition? So, and I'm going to ask us to keep our answer short, just because we're getting close to time. So go ahead, Zoe. That's a great question.
Listen, I think that, competition happens, kids keep score. Okay, they know. Let's not kid ourselves. However, that's where the job of the parents and the coaches come, is that to focus on skill performance, skill development, skill acquisition, and that even though you may lose, you can still progress. We did that play well. We put this system together, and that was executed. We maybe didn't win, but we're progressing that way. So I think you've got to change the lens through which you look at success, from an outcome of the scoreboard to the outcome of how well you're actually doing from a development standpoint.
Awesome. Matt?
Perfect. Taking exactly onto that, when I do goal setting with athletes, oftentimes I use that triangle of outcome goals, performance goals, process goals, and so much of what we consider success are those outcome goals, which are not in our control. So to me, if we can focus more on those performance goals, well, I ran my personal best in this time. I didn't come first. Somebody had a better day than I did. to me, the focus is on, again, what are we actually looking at? It's not that I didn't come first place, it's that I had my best time ever. And I think that, just as Zoe hit on perfectly, that the metrics that we're judging success and improvement on need to be changed in that framework. And like Zoe said as well, we're always going to have competitive urges, you know, so to try and stifle that, I don't think is the right thing, but we can absolutely change the lens that we're looking through.
It's simple sport clubs, because I look at it like, so I learned about a triathlon club for youth kids. I think it was like Iron Kids or something like that. So when the results were posted, they were posted alphabetically, not in terms of who was first, second, third. So all the data didn't change, how it was presented changed, and sent a very different signals to people about what the importance was. And I think, so we need to be creative about how we do those things. It's not that competition is going to happen, performance is going to happen. It's an absolute in that way. How we translate that into success and how we present that in the public forum, we need to be more creative.
That's a fantastic example. Thank you very much, Zoe. I'm going to ask Zoe and Matt to each give a wrap-up comment, and then I'm going to wrap up the session and share what's coming next week. So which of you would like to go first?
I'll go first on this one. So, thanks. Belonging is about trust. Belonging is knowing that when I go out to be someplace, I'm going to be safe. I'm going to be psychologically safe. I'm going to be emotionally safe. I'm going to be physically safe. I'm going to be socially safe. And if those things coalesce together, then I know that I can belong to that group because they accept me for who I am. And but ultimately, it relies on you, and it relies on my headspace as a trans woman to put my place within society reasonably. So I create the conditions for that safety. And if it's not safe, I have a choice to make. I can either stay there, or I can do something different. So realize that at the end of the day, belonging is important, but it starts with me. And I set the conditions around which belonging happens. But those 4 areas that are around trust, I think, are really important as well.
Fantastic. Matt?
I think this is the one where I wish I actually went first, because trying to follow up on that. I'm just going to tag on to that. To me, that trust, that safe space is what allows authenticity. And to me, if you can't feel like you're comfortable in your own skin, whether you're afraid of judgment, whatever it might be, we're always going to have anxiety. We're always going to have stress. We're not going to be able to be happy or to even achieve, even if it is an outcome goal that we want to achieve. We're always going to be held back. And so, the way that Zoe put it was just perfect. Without that safety, without that trust, I think that we're going to be stuck. And I think that until we have the personal self-awareness first of where we might be inadvertently contributing to, I guess, the opposite of safety or the ability to be authentic, we're not going to be able to accomplish what I think we all want to accomplish. So digging into ourselves first is what is needed before we can then really authentically feel like we can build trust with others.
Fantastic. I am so grateful to Matt and Zoe for joining us today. It was such a gift to have both of you here and to get to reconnect with both of you around this. One of the pieces that I love so much about the work I've been able to do is the people I meet along the way. That's the true gift of the work. And both of you have been such amazing influences in my life. And I was really grateful to have the opportunity to share you with a broader audience. So thank you both so much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you, Matt. It's been great to hear your stories as well.
Hey, likewise, amazing.
I'm just going to share next week's session for those that can join us then. So we're next week we have Dr. David Legg from Mount Royal University, and David and I served on the Canadian Paralympic Committee back about 10 years ago when I first started in that work. And so he's going to bring some really interesting perspectives on parasport and adapted sport and physical activity and his experience there. And Karen Craggs-Milne, who runs a company called Conscious Equality, and she focuses a lot on equality, race, and gender. And so I think that will be a really interesting dialogue as well. So you can register on the inclusionincorporated.com website. And yeah, so happy to have the two guests today. Thank you again, Zoe and Matt. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we will post this session on the website shortly, so you can also revisit it there. So thank you everyone. Have a wonderful day and take care.
Thank you for participating.